I only needed shelter,
Yeah.
but something behind that old oven already knew my name.
No room, no key, no family waiting. Just a black garbage bag and $3 she had earned washing lunch plates at a diner. And with those $3, she bought a spun-glass ornament kiln, soot-blackened outside Corning in Steuben County, New York, where it had fallen off maps in 1987. The chimney had collapsed through the north roof. 3 windows stood open to rain and starlings. The county condemned it on April 14, 2016, and marked it for demolition after the first thaw. Behind a loose firebrick in the annealing oven waited a sealed compartment untouched for 35 years, holding what would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Mae Eleanor Bell had been leaving her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she learned to pack quietly. Her father disappeared before she remembered him, and every apartment after that seemed borrowed. Thin walls, knocking radiators, cupboards lined with another family's paper. Mae kept one shoebox beneath her bed. Everything she trusted had to fit inside it. Her mother, June, worked pharmacy counters and nursing home evenings, returning with swollen ankles and the smell of hand lotion. She loved her daughters practically, always counting rent. When choices narrowed, she chose the louder need. The one place that did not feel temporary was her grandfather's workshop behind a narrow house on West 1st Street. Elias Bell was a master glassblower with a left thumb flattened by 40 years of gathering molten glass. Every Saturday, he tied a faded blue apron around Mae, set clear rods beside the bench torch, and made her wait until the flame showed a clean inner cone. He taught her to rotate with both hands, steady as a clock, warming the rod before bringing it into the hotter zone. When the glass softened, he drew it into threads so fine they trembled in the air, then spun those threads over a small blown form until frost seemed to gather by choice. At noon, they ate tomato sandwiches beside the annealing oven while the finished ornaments cooled slowly enough not to crack. Glass remembers every hurried hand, Elias told her. Mae understood later that he had not been speaking only about glass. A rushed thing carried strain inside it even when the surface looked whole. He died in January when Mae was 12 after a short illness nobody explained until the funeral was over. By spring, the landlord had emptied the workshop. The torch, shears, graphite paddles, notebooks, and boxes of Lauscha rods vanished into estate sales and storage auctions. Mae recovered only his blue apron, scorched at the hem, before June folded the rest of that life away. Her sister, Corinne, was 7 years older and decided quickly for everyone in the room. She labeled pantry jars and opened Mae's mail because bills, she said, affected them both. After Corinne became engaged, her fiancé's shoes appeared by the door, then his shirts. Mae's bathroom shelf narrowed without a conversation. On October 3, 2022, Mae returned from the diner after dark and found the key turning uselessly in the lock. A black garbage bag sat beneath the porch light, tied at the neck with yellow cord. Through the front window, she saw her mother at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug, looking down. Corinne opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. "You cannot keep making my life smaller now." 8 words. Mae put one hand against the doorframe. Her blue apron was inside, hanging from a nail behind the pantry. She could see its corner through the gap between Corinne's shoulder and the wall. "My things," Mae said. "They're in the bag." The door closed. The chain slid free only after the deadbolt turned. Mae waited for her mother to rise, to cross the linoleum, to do one small impossible thing. June lifted the mug and drank. Mae picked up the bag. The porch light switched off before she reached the sidewalk. For 6 weeks, she moved along the southern tier according to warmth. In Elmira, she slept 2 nights in a hospital waiting room chair until a guard noticed she had no patient upstairs. In Bath, she curled behind a coin laundry where dryer vents warmed the brick. Hornell gave her 3 nights beneath a closed furniture store's loading dock. She washed in library restrooms and learned which church basements served soup without asking for an address. Her money thinned by exact amounts. $43 became $31 after a bus ticket. $31 became $19 after bread, apples, and a packet of aspirin. In Corning, she bought coffee only when the public library opened late because the paper cup allowed her to sit without being watched. By the sixth Tuesday, she had $5.18. The garbage bag had split along one seam, and rain had soaked the cuffs of every pair of socks she owned. That afternoon, in the Southeast Steuben County Library, Mae read the classifieds from habit rather than hope. Between an estate mower and a damaged upright piano, a county notice had been boxed in black ink. Abandoned industrial parcel, forfeiture sale, $3 plus recording fee waived. The description named a former spun-glass ornament kiln on Old River Road. Condemned, no utilities. Buyer assumes all liability. She read it twice, then carried the paper to the reference desk and asked for a county map. The librarian, a woman with silver glasses hanging on a red cord, marked the clerk's office and slid over a bus schedule without comment. Mae had $3 in bills and $2.18 in coins. She folded the notice into quarters, put it inside her coat, and spent the night walking because the morning bus fare was more than she could spare. At dawn, she turned toward the county clerk's office with the only $3 she refused to spend. The first bus left Corning before sunrise, carrying Mae west beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. She rode 11 miles with the deed notice folded between her palms, then stepped down where Old River Road separated from the county route. The driver pointed past a frozen drainage ditch and told her the property lay another 7 miles north. Mae walked until dusk, the garbage bag cutting into her fingers. That night, she slept in a hay barn with the owner's permission, buried beneath 2 horse blankets while the temperature fell to 26 degrees Fahrenheit. By morning, the wind had stiffened her wet socks inside her shoes. She returned to Corning on foot because the sale had to be recorded there before she could claim anything at the kiln. Market Street was opening when she arrived. A baker raised the shade at Poppleton's pastry shop. Steam clouded the windows of Old World Cafe. A delivery truck idled beside Sorga's restaurant. The neon clock inside West End Gallery remained dark, and the brass letters above Connor's Mercantile caught the thin morning sun. Mae passed them all carrying her split bag and the 3 soft dollar bills in her coat pocket. The county clerk's office occupied the second floor of a limestone building whose steps had been worn shallow at the center. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and old paper. A ceiling fan turned without moving much heat. Behind the counter sat a narrow woman with a pearl-headed pin holding her collar closed. Her nameplate read, Mrs. Lucille Hart, Deputy Clerk. Mae placed the advertisement on the counter. Mrs. Hart looked at the notice, then at Mae's shoes. You understand there is no legal residence permit. Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested. Yes, ma'am. You understand the structure carries a demolition order. Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not repair, insure, heat, or rescue anything on that parcel. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Hart removed her glasses and cleaned them with a square of cotton. Most bidders ask whether there is copper left in the walls. I'm not asking. No, the clerk said. You're not. She opened a gray ledger, found the parcel number, and turned the book so Mae could see the red notation beside it. The recording fee had been waived after 3 failed auctions. The county wanted a responsible name attached to the ruin before spring crews brought in a machine. Mae laid down the bills. Mrs. Hart counted them once, though there were only 3. She placed them inside a narrow receipt drawer, aligned their edges, and brought a brass stamp down upon the transfer paper. The blow made a dense official sound. The deed required 2 signatures. Mae wrote her full name on the first line and again beneath the liability clause. Mrs. Hart had begun blotting the ink when her hand stopped. Bell, she said. Mae kept hold of the pen. Eleanor Bell, my middle name. The clerk turned toward a row of wooden file boxes behind her. She withdrew one marked Defunct Trades, 1970-1995, and searched until she found a brittle card darkened by fingerprints. Elias Bell, she said, glassworker. Mae looked up. Mrs. Hart placed the card on the counter. In faded blue type, it listed Elias Bell, ornament finisher and lampworker, West 1st Street. Beneath that was a notation for seasonal contract work at the Old River Spun-Glass Works. He was my grandfather. The clerk's expression changed so slightly that only the line beside her mouth softened. He came here every December with a wooden crate. Never used the front stairs if they were icy. Said he trusted his hands more than county salt. What was in the crate? Ornaments. Small ones. Birds, bells, sometimes hearts. Mrs. Hart returned the card to its box. He left them at the orphan home on First Street. He never put his name on them. Mae touched the deed with one finger. He worked at the kiln for a time. Everyone did if they knew glass. The clerk slid the document toward her. The owner closed it suddenly. Your grandfather would not discuss why. The old blue apron seemed to move in Mae's memory, its scorched corner visible beyond Corinne's shoulder. She folded the deed once, carefully, without pressing the seal. Mrs. Hart wrote directions on the reverse of an envelope. Take Pulteney Street north, cross the Chemung River, then follow Old River Road past the disused rail spur. At the split walnut, keep left. The county marker is leaning, so do not depend upon it. She opened the receipt drawer again and looked at the 3 bills. This one, she said, lifting the least worn dollar, must remain with the transfer record until the quarterly audit. Mae nodded, not yet understanding why the clerk said it as though a small part of her would stay behind. The road out of town narrowed beside the river. Ice held along the shaded banks, and bare walnut trees stood in pairs where old property lines had once been fenced. After 4 miles, Mae passed a white farmhouse with a green pump in the yard. An elderly man splitting kindling raised one mitten. You headed to the glass place? Yes. He studied her, then pointed with the hatchet. Name's Walter Pike. My dog will bark, but he won't cross the ditch. The dog, a broad brown animal with one white ear, followed Mae along the fence line and gave a single warning bark at every gatepost. At the final walnut tree it stopped and watched her continue alone. The kiln appeared gradually through sumac and tall dead grass. It was longer than Mae had imagined, perhaps 40 feet by 24, built of soot-darkened brick over a low fieldstone foundation. A corrugated metal roof sagged where the chimney had fallen through it. The chimney itself leaned in broken courses above the north wall, its upper section scattered across the roof like black teeth. 3 windows had no glass. 2 others held fragments that bent the daylight into pale green wedges. Above the central door hung a wooden sign with only 4 letters still readable beneath the blistered paint. Glass. Mae stood beneath it with the deed inside her coat. The building did not seem abandoned in the manner of an empty lot. It seemed interrupted. The door had swollen against the frame. She worked the edge of the county notice beneath the latch, braced one shoulder against the planks, and pushed until the lower hinge gave a reluctant groan. Cold air moved outward carrying soot, wet wood, and the faint mineral odor of old furnace brick. Her first step broke a crust of plaster on the floor. The sound traveled through the building and returned from the back room a moment later. The front room had once been used for packing. A long table stood beneath the windows, its surface furred with dust. Paper ornament dividers had collapsed inside a carton, each square delicate as a wasp nest. When Mae touched one, it yielded without sound. Beyond a partition lay the workroom. Rusted gas lines ran above 2 benches. A foot pedal remained beneath one station, frozen in place. On the far wall, the annealing oven occupied nearly half the room, its iron door mottled red-brown but still hanging true. Mae crossed toward it. Broken glass shifted under her soles with a small, bright music. Somewhere in the rafters a starling beat its wings, shaking soot downward. She tasted grit when she breathed through her mouth. The oven door resisted, then opened 2 inches. A draft, carrying the smell of cold ash, passed across her face. Inside, the brick chamber was black but dry. She closed it again. By dusk, Mae had dragged loose boards over the missing windows and cleared a space near the packing table. She found no electricity, no running water, and no safe chimney. For supper, she ate the last apple from her bag and drank from the bottle Mrs. Hart had filled before sending her away. Night settled quickly along the river. The roof ticked as the temperature dropped. Mice moved inside the wall, stopping whenever Mae shifted beneath her coat. She lay on flattened cardboard with the garbage bag beneath her head and listened to the separate voices of the building. A beam tightening, metal cooling, wind pressing through a crack above the door. Near midnight, something struck once inside the annealing oven. Not a mouse, not falling brick, a single contained knock. Mae sat up in the darkness and looked toward the iron door until the outline of it emerged from the room. True beauty is found in giving, not keeping. At first light, Mae opened the oven and found nothing fallen. She ran her hands along the chamber walls, testing each brick, but the cold had stiffened her fingers and the darkness made every joint appear suspicious. The sound might have come from contracting iron. She closed the door and turned instead to the work that would keep her alive. For 3 days she learned the property by necessity. The well stood beneath a roof of warped cedar shingles 40 yards downhill. Its pump groaned before giving up water the color of weak tea, which cleared after 6 full buckets. The outhouse leaned east but remained sound enough once she replaced one hinge with wire. Inside the kiln, she memorized the floorboards, a long complaint near the entrance, 2 quick notes beside the packing bench, and silence along the stone footing of the annealing oven. On the 4th morning, she walked back toward town with a list folded in her pocket. Connor's Mercantile was deeper than its narrow storefront suggested. The air held iron filings, seed dust, and the sweet oil used on axe handles. Drawers climbed the wall behind the counter, each labeled in black pencil. A man with a white crescent scar across his chin was fitting a wooden handle into a hammerhead. "Morning," he said. "I'm Arthur Connors." Mae placed her list beside the register. "I own the old ornament kiln." Arthur stopped tapping the handle. "Own is a serious word for that building. It is the word on the deed." He read the list without smiling. "You have money? Not enough." "That answer, I believe." Mae waited while he looked through the front window toward the courthouse clock. At last, he drew a ruled account book from beneath the counter. "I can carry $12 for 30 days, he said. "No more until I see what you do with the first 12. I will repay it." Most people say that before asking the amount. He wrote Mae Bell on a fresh line, then pushed a thin manual across the counter. Its cover showed a man repairing a barn roof with a ladder no sensible person would trust. This is free because nobody buys it. Read the chimney chapter before you make a fire. Mae chose only what she could carry. A wire chimney brush for $2.75, a coil of sash cord for 89 cents, 6 pounds of stove cement for $1.40, a second-hand claw hammer for $1.10, and a galvanized bucket priced at 65 cents. Arthur added a pair of cracked leather gloves without entering them in the ledger. "Those are not credit," he said. "They are self-defense." The chimney chapter warned against cleaning from below unless the roof was unsafe. Mae's roof was unsafe in 3 separate places, so below was all she had. She removed the rusted stove collar, wrapped a flour sack around the opening, and cut a slit just wide enough for the brush rod. The first upward stroke loosened a black shower behind the cloth. The second brought down flakes of creosote as large as walnut shells. She worked the brush through each joint of the rod, turning clockwise so none could unscrew inside the flue. Every 20 minutes she stopped, tied the sack closed, and carried the soot outside. The blockage weighted 14 feet above the floor. The brush struck it with a dull firmness and would rise no farther. Mae found a length of iron pipe behind the workbench, bound it beside the rod, and tapped carefully until a nest of twigs and furnace wool collapsed into the sack. It took 5 hours. When she finished, her face was streaked black except where sweat had cleared 2 narrow paths beside her nose. She held a candle beneath the open collar. The flame bent inward and remained there. Mae mixed stove cement with enough water to make it hold the shape of the trowel, sealed 2 gaps around the thimble, and waited until the following afternoon before lighting anything. Her first fire consisted of newspaper, 3 dry walnut twigs, and a split piece of packing crate. Smoke rose through the flue without entering the room. She added wood 1 piece at a time. The iron stove clicked as it warmed. Frost loosened from the nearest window frame and ran in a dark line down the wall. Mae set a dented saucepan over the lid and cooked oats with half an apple sliced into them. She ate, seated on the floor, holding the warm bowl in both hands while the building gathered heat by degrees. Afterward, she began taking stock of the workroom. She found graphite paddles worn smooth at the edges, a brass caliper that still opened cleanly, 2 narrow blowpipes, a box of charred corks, and a marvering plate fixed to the bench with square-headed screws. Beneath a canvas sheet lay a foot-operated lathe used for rotating ornament forms. Its leather belt had broken, but the flywheel moved when Mae pressed it with her palm. 3 jars held fragments of colored glass rod, cobalt, amber, and a red so dark it appeared black until she raised it toward the window. On the wall above the annealing oven hung a wooden rack with 12 spaces and only one remaining mandrel. Mae lifted it free. The steel was straight. Something knocked inside the oven again. This time she was standing beside it. Mae opened the iron door and waited for dust to settle. The chamber measured nearly 6 feet deep, with a floor of dense refractory brick and walls thick enough to hold temperature through the night. She tapped the inner surface with the wooden handle of her hammer. Most bricks answered with a dry, shallow click. At the rear left corner, one returned a lower note. She tapped the bricks around it, moving outward until she could hear the boundary of the difference. A rectangle 3 courses high and 4 bricks wide. The center brick also sat forward by less than the width of a fingernail. Mae tried to pull it. It did not move. She took the brass caliper from the bench and used one jaw to scrape hardened ash from the mortar joint. There was no mortar beneath the soot. The brick had been fitted loosely, its edges beveled so carefully that grime alone held it in place. When she eased it free, it was lighter than the others. The cavity behind it contained a round cedar disc fitted with a small iron ring. Mae put 2 fingers through the ring and pulled. The disc moved 1 inch, releasing the dry scent of cedar and old cloth. She stopped. The manual, the credit account, the failing roof, and the cold all seemed to withdraw to the edges of the room. Mae set the lamp closer, laid a folded blanket on the oven floor, and drew the disc out along its grain. Behind it was a compartment nearly 3 feet deep. The first package had been wrapped in waxed linen and tied with red thread. Mae cut no knots. She loosened them, wound the thread around 2 fingers, and folded the cloth back 1 layer at a time. Inside lay Elias Bell's lampworking shears. She knew them by the crescent-shaped chip in one handle. Beneath them were his graphite tweezers, a brass hand torch, 3 shaping knives, and the narrow steel pick he had used to open air channels and soften glass. Each tool had been rubbed with oil before storage. None showed more than a film of rust. A second bundle held glass rods separated by paper sleeves. Clear borosilicate rested beside pale blue, cranberry red, and tubes striped with white latticino. On top lay a spool carrying spun-glass thread, delicate enough to tremble when Mae breathed. At the back of the compartment sat a rectangular tin box and a smaller wooden case. The tin lid had been sealed with a strip of cloth tape. Mae carried it to the packing table, cleared away dust, and sat beneath the broken window where daylight was strongest. Inside were bundles of banknotes arranged by denomination, each tied with cotton tape and marked in pencil. The older bills had broad margins and red seals. Later, currency had been added in separate packets. Beneath them were canvas rolls heavy with coins. Mae counted everything twice. There were silver dollars, walking Liberty half-dollars, standing Liberty quarters and Mercury dimes, along with paper currency placed in careful hundreds. The total came to $35,000 exactly. At the bottom lay a purple heart in a small black case. The ribbon had faded toward brown. Engraved on the reverse was the name Thomas Edwin Vail in the year 1944. Mae closed the case. The smaller wooden box contained no money. Inside, cushioned in lamb's wool, rested a glass heart no larger than a plum. Clear threads crossed through its center without seams, woven so densely that the object caught the weak afternoon light and returned it in a soft white glow. Mae pressed it between her palms. It felt solid, though its walls appeared impossibly thin. Beneath the heart lay a handwritten list of names and Christmas dates extending across 31 years. Some entries were marked with the ages of children. Others carried only a first name and the word delivered. At the bottom was an envelope addressed in familiar slanting handwriting. Mae knew the hand. She did not open it. She returned the tools to the linen, placed the glass heart beside the envelope, and carried the tin box to the oven compartment. Then she changed her mind and brought it back out. Hiding it again felt like accepting a responsibility she did not yet understand. Darkness reached the river before 5. Mae walked downhill past the well to where the chemung moved between shelves of ice. The current showed black in the center, lifting and lowering thin reflections from the opposite bank. She sat on a stone with the unopened letter inside her coat and watched the water pass without keeping the shape of anything above it. True beauty is found in giving, not keeping. Morning entered through the boarded windows and thin bars. Mae placed the envelope beside the glass heart and warmed her hands over the stove before touching either one. Elias had written her birthday cards in the same right-leaning script, each capital letter narrow at the top. The final line on the envelope had been added with a weaker hand. For whoever still knows how to wait, she eased a knife beneath the flap. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then the rear bricks held longer than my body did. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in Rochester by Dr. Samuel Levin on March 18, 1987. He gave me months, not years, and advised me to arrange my affairs. I have tried to arrange them honestly. The Bell work began with Nathaniel Bell, who cut window glass in Albany in 1849. His daughter Clara came to Corning in 1871 and learned lampwork from German craftsmen near the railworks. Clara's son Edwin opened this kiln in 1902 beside the river. Edwin's daughter Margaret Vale kept it through the Depression, and her son Thomas worked here until he was killed in France in 1944. I was Margaret's nephew, born in 1932, and I entered this room carrying coal when I was 11. The trade closed on October 17, 1987. By then, the furnace had been quiet for weeks. Orders had moved to machines, and the county would not permit me to operate the old gas train alone. There had already been more than 30 years of silence in some corners of this building, though the benches still knew what hands were for. If you mean to work glass, begin with patience. Warm, clear rod at the edge of the flame before entering the inner cone. Keep soft glass near 1000 degrees Fahrenheit when shaping, and never let one side cool while the other remains bright. For spun threads, turn the core twice for every single draw of the right hand. Anneal small ornaments at 950 degrees, hold for 30 minutes, then lower the oven no faster than 100 degrees each hour. The money is not a reward. It is stored labor. Use it only where work cannot proceed without it. The glass heart was made by Margaret after Thomas died. It survived 3 drops onto stone because she built it from crossing threads rather than one thick wall. She gave ornaments to children every Christmas afterward. The names are included so they will not become a story without people in it. Inheritance is not what remains untouched. It is the tool worn smooth by another hand, taken up carefully, and returned in working order. Behind the back door, beneath the eastern walnut, you will find Thomas's marker. The metal belongs there when you are ready. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here, Elias Nathaniel. Bell, September 6, 1987. Mae read the letter once without moving, then again with one finger following the lines. When she finished, she folded it along its original creases. The paper obeyed them immediately. 35 years inside the oven had not taught it a different shape. The back door was hidden behind a sheet of warped plywood. She removed 4 nails and pushed until frozen leaves cracked beneath the threshold. East of the building, the walnut tree divided low above the ground. Mae cleared sumac with the claw of her hammer and found a slate marker almost level with the soil. Thomas Edwin Vale, 1921–1944. He kept the fire. She knelt and brushed mud from the dates. The purple heart remained inside the kiln. It would stay there until she could bring it out without treating the gesture as payment for having found it. Back in the workroom, Mae unwrapped Elias's hand torch. Its fuel hose had hardened beyond use, but beside it lay a small alcohol lamp with a brass cap. She cleaned the wick, filled the reservoir from a bottle found beneath the bench, and struck a match. The flame rose blue at its base. Mae placed the glass heart behind it. Crossing threads caught the light one by one until the center appeared to hold a white ember. Nothing in the room became new. The broken roof remained broken. Yet the lamp had been made to burn, and now it did. She began thinking of the people who had carried her farther than they knew. The librarian with silver glasses had marked the map and given her the bus schedule. The hay farmer had opened his barn and laid down 2 horse blankets without asking why she traveled alone. Mrs. Hart had filled Mae's bottle at the clerk's sink, then kept one of the $3 inside the transfer drawer. Arthur Connors had entered her name in a credit book and called cracked gloves self-defense. None had offered rescue. Each had offered one usable thing. Perhaps someone once did that for you. A meal left quietly, a ride in bad weather, a sentence spoken when you had nearly stopped. What was the small kindness you still carry, and does the person who gave it know? Mae wrote the 4 names on the blank reverse of the classified notice. She added the date and placed the paper beneath Elias's letter. The act did not repay anything. It merely kept the names from disappearing. That night she moved her cardboard bed into the workroom beside the stove. Elias's shears, graphite tweezers, and steel pick rested on the folded blue wrapping within reach. She put the glass heart in its wooden case and set it near her shoulder. The flame in the alcohol lamp diminished slowly, then held. Snow arrived on December 2nd, 6 inches laid evenly across the collapsed north roof and the dead grass around the kiln. Mae read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the stove, tracing each diagram with a soot-darkened finger. The building measured 40 feet by 24, with 2 simple roof slopes. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 18 squares of asphalt shingles, 6 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 30 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Arthur Connors looked at the figures, then at her. "You measured the pitch twice." He disappeared into the rear of the store and returned with a roofing hatchet whose handle had gone smooth and dark. "It belonged to my brother," he said. "Bring it back when the roof stops leaking." The skilled hands belonged to Samuel Pritchard, a retired roofer of 73 with a bent left knee and a red wool cap. He examined the broken rafters from the ground, climbed the ladder once, and refused the envelope Mae had prepared. "Pay me by listening the first time." They worked 11 days. Samuel showed her how to sister. A sound length of pine against each split rafter, driving bolts through both pieces rather than trusting old nails. Mae stretched a chalk line across the felt, snapped it once, and watched a clean blue mark divide the gray surface. He taught her to set each nail with 3 strokes, one to place it, one to drive it, one to finish it flush. On the 4th morning, he tapped the shingle beside her boot. That nail's proud. Mae reached for the hatchet. Pull it! She did. Wind came hard from the river on the 7th day, forcing them down before noon. On the 9th, Mae tore a strip of felt while dragging it beneath a repaired valley and had to remove 2 rows of shingles to replace it properly. Samuel said nothing until she finished, then handed her the thermos. By December 14th, the last ridge cap lay straight beneath a pale sky. Mae climbed down and stood in the workroom while Samuel poured a bucket of melted snow over the repaired section. Nothing fell through. The chimney looked solid from the floor. From the roof, Mae saw that the winter had peeled the brick faces away in thin layers. Several courses had spalled so deeply that their centers showed, and the mortar between them powdered beneath her thumb. Arthur ordered hydraulic lime and fire clay from Rochester. Samuel helped her rig a rope around the remaining stack, but the masonry work Mae did herself. She mixed 2 parts hydraulic lime, 1 part screen sand, and 1/2 part fire clay, adding water slowly until the mortar held against a vertical joint without slumping. Each damaged brick came free under a narrow, cold chisel. Mae cleaned the beds, dampened them lightly, and reset the replacements with joints no thicker than her smallest finger. For 3 weeks the temperature remained in the 20s. She could work only with bare hands because gloves dulled her sense of the mortar. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb. She climbed down, held them near the stove until they hurt, and returned before the mixture stiffened in the bucket. One morning a repaired course shifted under the weight above it. Mae removed 6 bricks before the mistake spread, rebuilt the corner, and braced it overnight with scrap oak. She learned to stop judging progress by height. On January 27th, she lit a test fire of dry walnut and newspaper. Samuel stood outside while Mae watched the stove collar. The flame drew inward. No smoke entered the room. From the yard, Samuel raised one gloved hand. The chimney carried a clean gray ribbon into the winter sky. The white pine floorboards were scarred but not ruined. Their hand-cut rosehead nails sat deep enough to preserve the history of the boards, though Mae drove several lower with the nail set before sanding. Arthur rented her a random orbit sander for $14 per day. Mae carried it back on a borrowed handcart along with paper in 3 grits. The first pass used 80 grit and lifted soot, old varnish, and decades of heel marks. The machine pulled harder than she expected, jerking toward the wall whenever she let her shoulders loosen. The second pass at 120 grit erased the rough arcs left behind. The final 220 grit paper moved quietly enough that she could hear the river beneath the motor. Dust entered everything. Mae sealed the oven compartment with cloth, wrapped Elias's tools in waxed linen, and swept 3 times before applying the first coat of oil. The pine darkened at once. A second coat brought out long bands of grain. After the third, she left the room untouched for a 48-hour cure. The boards shifted from dark honey toward mahogany beneath the southern windows. Old dents remained, but now each one belonged to the floor rather than the dirt covering it. There was one bad morning. Mae woke before daylight with no strength for the sander, the brush, or the careful counting of hours. She walked to the marsh and sat on an overturned bucket. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, lifting one foot and setting it down with deliberate slowness. For 3 hours the bird did almost nothing. Mae did no work that day. The following morning she returned to the kiln, opened both doors, and began the final oil coat without explaining her absence to anyone. There were 8 windows in all. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The remaining window held a single original pane dated 1788 in a scratch notation along the sash, its surface rippling enough to bend the walnut trees outside. Mae removed that sash intact and stored it flat beneath blankets until the others were repaired. She cut replacement panes 1/8 inch smaller than each opening, pressed glazing points into the wood with the side of a putty knife, and warmed Diap 33 putty between her palms before rolling it into narrow ropes. The heel of the knife compressed the putty against the glass. One steady pull shaped the bevel so rain would run away from the sash. The old counterweight cords had rotted inside the frames. Mae replaced them with a 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot before lowering the weight into its pocket. The first knot slipped. The second held. She repaired the cracked windows one at a time, saving sound sections where she could rather than replacing whole panes. At night, she scraped dried putty from her cuffs beside the stove. The 1788 glass returned to the eastern frame on February 23rd. Mae set it without driving a single point too tightly. When the sash rose, the outside world warped gently across the old pane, river and trees moving as if seen through clear water. On the final window, she drew the putty knife across the lower rail and heard a small tap. A chickadee had landed on the walnut branch outside. It tilted its black-capped head toward the restored glass, then pecked once at its own bent reflection. Mae held still until it flew away. The walls had been built with horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath. Near the chimney, heat and damp had loosened whole sections until they sounded hollow beneath Mae's knuckles. Her first patch fell before supper. The second cracked around the edge. The third remained on the wall until morning, then slid down intact and broke across the floor. Arthur brought an old paper bag from the rear shelf of the mercantile. Inside was a clean horsehair his brother had saved from a plastering job years earlier. Mae mixed it into lime plaster by hand, separating the strands so they crossed rather than clumped. She dampened the lath and applied a scored scratch coat, cutting shallow horizontal lines before it set. The brown coat followed at 3/8 of an inch and cured for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finish coat was 1/8 inch, thin enough to follow the small irregularities of the original wall. The repaired surface was not perfectly flat, neither was anything around it. These patches will hold another 100 years. She said it softly, then washed the lime from her hands. Doris Keene owned the Old World Cafe and wore a pencil through the knot of her gray hair. Twice a week she left a folded paper bag on the kiln doorstep before opening the cafe. One held biscuits and bacon. Another held beans, 2 oranges, and a jar of soup wrapped in newspaper. Mae carried the empty jars back. "I can pay for these now." Doris pushed them beneath the counter. "In candles when the shop reopens." She did not ask when that might be. Caleb Morris arrived one Saturday on a red Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow-shouldered, and missing one front tooth. Without introducing himself, he began breaking the walnut rounds Samuel had stacked beside the wall. Mae brought out $2. Caleb shook his head and kept working, my mother said, about your grandfather. That was all. By noon, he had split enough wood for 3 weeks and stacked it bark side up beneath the new eave. Before leaving, he tested the pile with one hard push to make certain it would not fall. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his walk between the parsonage and the hospital. His black coat was brushed pale at both elbows. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat from the road, paused beside the leaning county marker, and offered the same forward prayer. Keep her hands steady. Some mornings Mae heard him. Some mornings she did not. The prayer remained useful either way. Mae had postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door beneath the packing table opened onto 7 granite steps, each hollowed slightly at the center. Below was a 12 by 15-foot room with a fieldstone floor and walls that held the cold without dampness. At the center lay a dressed granite slab, smoother than the surrounding stones. A craft mark had been carved into it, a flame crossed by a loop of drawn glass. Mae brushed dirt from the groove but did not test the slab's weight. Some sealed things could wait until the person opening them understood the room around them. Under the 3rd step, her fingers touched oak. The small box had swollen against the stone and came free only after she worked a putty knife along both sides. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped into the same flame and thread symbol carved on the granite. Beneath it was a tintype dated 1903. A young woman stood outside the kiln before the chimney had blackened. She held a lamp-working torch in one hand. Her dark hair was parted in the center, and the narrow line of her mouth was so like Mae's that Mae looked away before examining it again. On the back, written in brown ink, were the words, Clara Bell, daughter of founder Edwin Bell, aged 25, summer of 1903. Mae carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside the glass heart. She tried it in the desk, the tool chest, and the old iron cabinet. It opened none of them. There it remained. Snow retreated first from the southern wall, exposing flattened grass and chips of green glass. The creek grew loud with runoff. Walnut catkins hung from the branches like pale cords, shifting whenever the river wind reached them. Mae cleaned Elias's tools but did not begin the full craft that spring. The fuel lines needed inspection, the annealing controls needed replacing, and memory was not the same as readiness. She selected 1 silver dime from the cash. It would pay for the clear rods, fuel, and small pieces of colored glass. She would practice beads, threads, and simple loops before attempting an ornament. Every failed sample would be dated and kept. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, on December 19, 2024, Mae completed the first ornament. It began as a clear glass tube warmed slowly at the edge of the torch flame. She rotated it between both hands until the walls softened evenly, then gave one careful breath and formed a hollow sphere no larger than a walnut. Around it, she spun crossing threads of clear and cranberry glass, turning the core twice for each draw of her right hand, exactly as Elias had written. The first thread sagged. She reheated it, drew it away, and began again. When the pattern held, Mae placed the ornament inside the rebuilt annealing oven at 950 degrees Fahrenheit. She held it there for 30 minutes, then lowered the temperature and measured stages through the night. At dawn, the ornament came out whole. She hung it above the packing table on a length of white thread. It turned in the heat rising from the stove, catching the morning light without asking anyone to admire it. The restored interior remained modest. The pine floors showed old dents beneath their oil. The plaster carried the slight waves of handwork. 8 repaired windows admitted the river, the walnuts, and the changing weather. Elias's tools rested in a shallow drawer lined with blue apron cloth, each one cleaned and returned to the place where a hand could find it. The brass key waited on the mantel until the following April. Caleb, taller now and riding a truck instead of the Schwinn, came to help prune a dead limb from the eastern walnut. When the limb fell, it exposed a square iron plate fixed to the trunk's sheltered side, nearly hidden beneath 80 years of bark. The flame and thread symbol had been stamped at its center. Mae brought the key. The lock turned stiffly. Behind the plate was a narrow cavity lined with tin. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag wrapped in oilcloth and a note written by Clara Bell on November 11, 1918. The note was brief. Clara wrote that the flag had hung above the kiln while men from Corning served overseas in the Great War. Her brother had returned with damaged lungs. Others had not returned at all. She had hidden the flag after the armistice because symbols, like tools, could be worn out by careless display. "Keep this until someone remembers that service is not ownership," she had written. "Then let it breathe once more." Mae unfolded the flag across the packing table. The cotton showed yellowing at the creases, but no tears. She did not hang it permanently. On Veterans Day, she placed it beneath the restored windows for one afternoon, then folded it along Clara's original lines and returned it to the tree. The Purple Heart was taken to Bath National Cemetery on June 6, 2025, the 81st anniversary of the Normandy landings. Mae carried it in its black case and stood before a simple memorial stone while Reverend Boyd read Thomas Edwin Vale's name. There was no crowd. Doris came with flowers from her yard, and Caleb removed his cap. Afterward, Mae returned the medal to the kiln and placed it beside Thomas's list of Christmas children. Honor did not require abandoning the object that had carried the name safely for so long. Of the $35,000, Mae used 4 coins. The first dime bought practice glass, a silver quarter paid for new torch seals. $0.50 covered the postage for a replacement thermocouple. A second dime purchased red thread for the first boxes. Repairs were paid through cafe work, window glazing, small loans repaid to Arthur, and ornaments sold only after they survived cooling, handling, and a deliberate drop onto the pine workbench. The remaining money went back into the tin box. Mae added a new ledger showing every coin she had removed and why. Around the box, she wrapped fresh waxed linen, then placed it behind the cedar disc. On top lay a card for the next one. Use only what the work requires. The shop reopened without an announcement. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard between a notice for piano lessons and an advertisement for seasoned firewood. Hand-spun glass ornaments made slowly on Old River Road orders, limited by the oven. The first customer requested 2 clear bells. The second asked for a small bird in memory of her mother. By the following December, Mae's mailing list held 43 names, written in pencil because ink made changes seem too difficult. No customer was promised a delivery date until the glass had cooled. Caleb returned one November afternoon carrying a plank wrapped in an army blanket. He had carved the letters by hand and filled them with black milk paint. Old River spun glass Bell and Daughters. Mae read the final 2 words. "There are no daughters," she said. Caleb rested the sign against the packing bench. The gap in his front teeth had been repaired, though his smile still leaned toward one side. There weren't any orders either. Mae ran her thumb across the carved ampersand. Clara had worked there. Margaret had worked there. Their names had survived in letters, markers, and the shape of a brass key, even when county files had reduced the building to a forfeited parcel. Samuel helped Caleb hang the sign beneath the eave. Doris watched from her car. Nobody made a speech. That evening, Mae opened a clean sheet of paper at Elias's old bench. "My dear one, whoever you are," she wrote the date beneath the line and paused until the stove settled. She described the roof, the chimney, and the windows without pretending they would last forever. She listed the new annealing schedule, the fuel shut-off sequence, and the place where Arthur's roofing hatchet should be returned. She named Doris, Caleb, Samuel, Reverend Boyd, Mrs. Hart, and the librarian whose red cord she still remembered. She did not explain what kind of person should inherit the kiln. Elias had not required goodness in advance. He had offered welcome, tools, and responsibility in that order. Mae placed her unfinished letter beneath his. Outside, the restored sign moved once in the winter wind. The eastern walnut stood above Thomas's marker, holding Clara's flag within its living trunk. On the workbench, the woven glass heart rested beside a new list of ornaments given without charge. 1 for the children's ward, 6 for the county shelter, and 12 left anonymously at the old orphan home. True beauty is found in giving, not keeping. Mae lowered the flame, checked the oven latch, and turned to the completed ornament until its threads aligned with the light. Then she closed the door without locking it. The spun-glass ornament kiln waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Mrs. Hart had retired, and a younger clerk now occupied the counter beneath the slow ceiling fan. The transfer ledger remained in the lowest drawer. Inside its receipt envelope lay the first dollar Mae had paid. Its edges had softened. The inked date was still readable. No audit had ever required its removal, and no one had found a reason to spend it.